There are those who advocate for space exploration to the moon and beyond.
Part of our reason for going into space is to go, but we can afford to do it even more if it brings back profits.
So there are vast resources on the surface of the moon. We know what's there.
We need to learn how to use the land on another planetary body and create a sustainable presence there to then move even deeper into the solar system.
But there have always been counter-arguments. Solar radiation can be deadly. And weightlessness causes all kinds of health issues.
When he returned to Earth, we still saw major decrements in cognitive performance. And so that was kind of like baffling to us.
It's not like I just got stupider. I just felt so bad physically when I first got back that I just didn't do well on the test.
Deep space exploration, risk and reward on Xploration Outer Space. Hi everyone, I'm Emily Calandrelli. As a space exploration advocate, I believe there are many reasons we should explore beyond the Earth. One man who shares my enthusiasm is a former shuttle astronaut who went on to teach at MIT, Jeffrey Hoffman.
Spaceflight is definitely, what I would call a peak experience. You gradually feel this huge vehicle come alive. And that magical moment when the engines, all of a sudden everything goes quiet, and I felt myself sort of floating up in my seat and released the seat belt and floated out of my seat over to the window and looked out, and there's the Earth with the curvature and just the very thin little blue line of the atmosphere. And that's the environment that our Earth exists in, except for this very, very thin layer of atmosphere. That's one thing which is almost impossible to perceive from an earthly perspective. It's just this very, very thin layer. The atmosphere is not infinite, that we can just pump whatever waste gases we want to into it and it's not going to have any appreciable impact. You can look at the Earth and see ecological damage that humans have done, and you can see this from a cosmic perspective, and that's pretty scary.
Advocates for human exploration to deep space say it is an insurance policy if life on Earth becomes threatened by extreme climate change or other forces of nature.
Every day I come in and there's new asteroids found. We know where 95% of the large ones are. And those are ones that could cause global catastrophe if they should hit the Earth.
Some view settling on Mars as a way to protect our species from extinction. And perhaps along the way, we develop technologies and new strategies that can enhance life here on Earth.
The profit motive drove a lot of the explorations, not just curiosity, across the Earth. When you go out into space and we melt down asteroids and get rich, the main benefit will be that we'll be able to stop digging so hard into our own Earth.
The moon is the closest world to the Earth, and space exploration advocates believe it holds great promise for humanity.
Part of our reason for going into space is to go, to be the kind of people who are descendants of the great explorers like Leif Erikson and Columbus. We are their heirs, and we can afford to do some of that. But we can afford to do it even more if it brings back profits. So the question is, are there more ways to make money in space?
Advocates for deep space exploration believe it can unlock tremendous economic value.
There are vast resources on the surface of the moon. We know what's there. Platinum group metals, silver, gold, nickel, titanium. Some stuff that's actually very rare on Earth is there as well. The moon is a vast repository of helium-3, and helium-3 could be very important to our energy needs of the future because helium-3 could support clean fusion energy that could solve our planet's energy problems in the future. So that could be the magic elixir that makes the moon bountiful and valuable as a resource for planet Earth.
Some believe that the moon could act as a staging ground for further exploration into deep space, such as to Mars.
If we want to learn to live off of Earth, the moon really is the next logical step. It's a 4 or 5 day trip there and back. You can go anytime, come back anytime.
And then the next is, if we ever want to get to Mars, we need to practice first.
Others point to the treasure trove of knowledge that can result from knowing more about who we are and where we come from.
With what we learned from the moon, we can now look at asteroids, satellites of other planets, the surface of Mars, and understand the history of those objects because of what we learned from the moon.
Okay, bag 476 is the rock sample with a little bit of the soil near it of a chip. Chip off the rock.
The moon is this wonderful geologic body that we have so many questions about. And I think humans on the surface can help address fundamental questions about our solar system, about the Earth, about how the solar system works. Having astronauts on the surface of the moon looking back at the Earth is really important, not just for science, but for humanity.
And some see important benefits when we embark on great projects like lunar exploration. These massive efforts have the potential to bring nations together.
The spirit of Apollo could live today and could be even bigger than it was in the 60s.
Space exploration advocates often point to the economic benefits of deep space exploration to the moon and beyond, like mining precious metals. There is another argument, less tangible but perhaps even more powerful, which states that embarking on great projects brings societies together.
If there's one thing that represents space in the collective consciousness of children or anyone around the globe who looks up at the night sky, it's the moon. Wouldn't that be amazing to go there?
Advocates of space exploration believe that fascination can be harnessed to create what author Frank White calls a central project.
A central project engages quite a lot of people from the society in doing something extraordinary. It usually causes people to stretch beyond themselves and do things they didn't think they could do, and in many cases may have a spiritual dimension where taking on this big effort really changes the way people see themselves and how they see the world around them. When we've talked about central projects in the past, we look at examples like pyramids, Gothic cathedrals. Every society has forces pulling people apart and forces bringing people together. And so if you have something like a central project, if you have something like a bold space program, that functions as one of those avenues for people to come together without necessarily losing their differences. It's got to be something adventurous and bold.
Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest, was asked why did he want to climb it. He said, because it is there. Well, space is there, and we're going to climb it. And the moon and the planets are there, and new hopes for knowledge and peace are there. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked. Thank you.
I think Apollo was a central project in many ways. Compared, say, to Gothic cathedrals, it was very brief. It was 10 years. The estimate is it took about 400,000 people to do that particular effort. The other aspect of Apollo that does qualify it for a central project is the extent to which it focused American attention in particular on this one effort, this one initiative, that it was a unifying force at a time of great social conflict in the United States. We had experienced the assassination of President Kennedy. We experienced the assassination of Martin Luther King. There had been uprisings and riots in the streets. The war in Vietnam, the society was very, very split. And even though there is sort of an idea that Apollo completely united the country, that isn't quite true. There was opposition to it. But overall, it was a unifying force. The spirit of Apollo could live today and could be even bigger than it was in the 60s. It's really just a choice that we have to make right now as a planet.
But there are dangers to space exploration, and they are life-threatening.
In the last 24 hours, we have seen facilities now being created for the greatest and most complex exploration in man's history.
Decisions about space exploration are often political. Each succeeding president dating back to Kennedy has had to weigh the costs and the benefits. However, political considerations like job and budget priorities aren't the only impediments to exploring space. The fact is, the human body is simply not made for space.
Our species evolved on Earth, where we have gravity, 1G gravity. Once we move out of that, we see that the body is adapting to the different environment. So we kind of know next to nothing what will happen to humans if they actually spend more than a year in that microgravity/spaceflight environment. There's a few potential showstoppers to human spaceflight, and radiation is a big one. Once you venture out of low Earth orbit and to the moon or to Mars, then you're exposed to the full spectrum of space radiation, and there's really no way to shield yourself from that.
Astronaut Scott Kelly experienced it firsthand on the ISS.
When your eyes are closed and you're going to sleep, there are times where you can see these cosmic ray flashes hit your retina, and then you think, wow, that not only hit my eye, but it went right through my brain. Hopefully it's not bad for you.
The radiation is actually interacting with the DNA in our cells, and it can actually be a reason for cancer.
All this radiation, microgravity environment wreaks havoc a little bit on your physiology, your circulatory system.
Bodily fluids drift up towards the brain because of the lack of downward gravity. As a result, there is pressure on the brain, and the astronauts' eyes are adversely affected.
That's the second one of the potential showstoppers. And we have that fluid shift, and that is changing a host of things. Now, there's some pressure on the back of the eye and on the optic nerve. During like 2-week shuttle missions, we didn't see that. But once the exposure was longer, we saw that the astronauts said, I can't read that anymore. And we started noticing, hey, something is happening to their eyes. It can impair your vision, perhaps up to the point where you can no longer fully correct it. And again, spaceflight is a very hostile environment. And, astronauts need to be able to see properly to fully function in that environment. So yeah, radiation and this syndrome are like two major potential showstoppers to human spaceflight.
NASA has long been trying to understand all of the changes brought on by microgravity. And they had a unique opportunity to run an experiment. Scott and Mark Kelly were astronauts who spent time on the ISS. They are also identical twins.
This twin study got a lot of attention. Was this group of scientific experiments that used me as a crew member in space and my brother as a control subject on the ground to do some comparative research.
Both were measured before, during, and after Scott's nearly 1-year mission on the ISS.
Everything that we did in Scott, we did with Mark as well. Like the same blood draws, the same stool samples, the same cognitive testing. At the same time, we did it in Scott, but he was not going up on the space station. If we saw a change in Scott and we didn't see it in Mark, that just gives you more confidence in the finding.
Most of Kelly's physiology came back to normal after he returned to Earth. Dr. Bassner, a psychiatrist whose expertise is cognitive performance, noticed that Kelly's brain function did not return to his pre-mission levels.
In flight, we didn't see any major changes, but then when he returned to Earth, we saw a more major drop in cognitive performance. 6 months after he returned, we still saw major decrements in cognitive performance. And so that was kind of like baffling to us.
I just got stupider, although that does sometimes happen, but for other reasons. But I think the reason why was not that gravity affected my brain. It was more that I just felt so bad physically when I first got back that I just didn't do well on the test. Kind of like if you took the SAT when you had the flu, you probably wouldn't do as well as if you felt healthy. That was a little surprising.
This part matters because if we want to send people to Mars, we want to know with certainty that the astronauts are able to perform the tasks necessary for survival.
That period when, a crew lands on the Martian surface, is re-exposed to gravity, and now has to do mission-critical tasks, that may actually be a very critical phase that cognitive performance could be affected in that phase.
Research continues on how to combat these adverse health effects as NASA and private space companies look towards missions to the Moon and Mars in the not-too-distant future.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Why are we wasting this money going to the moon to show the Russians that we're better? Why don't we put it for more better earthly use?
There are vast resources on the surface of the moon.
And we'll get so rich that we might be able to turn this Earth into a beautiful park.
Our species evolved on Earth, where we have gravity. We kind of know next to nothing what will happen to humans if they actually spend more than a year in that microgravity/spaceflight environment.
The spirit of Apollo could live today and could be even bigger than it was in the 60s.
The debate between those who favor exploration of the moon and beyond continues. And despite the stops and starts, the march towards becoming a spacefaring civilization continues.
We'll certainly be on Mars. We'll have a colony on Mars. We'll have a colony on Moon. I'm certain of that. Where do we go beyond that? If you get closer to the sun, it's like uncomfortably hot. If you get farther away, it's uncomfortably cold. Beyond our solar system, the distances are so vast. We really need a completely new mode of transport, or we need to develop the warp speed like the Enterprise had, something like that, or opening wormholes or whatever.
As we work to solve the technological challenges of space travel, one thing remains certain. There are no nearby waterfalls, autumn leaves, and tropical beaches in our solar system. Or at least none that we know of.
It actually does make sense to conserve this planet because it's pretty nice. It's a pretty good home for us. So in addition to doing space exploration, let's conserve this planet.
For Xploration Outer Space, I'm Emily Calandrelli, and we'll see you next time.